have one more security topic which will be addressed. This is on identity and access management. And through this session, we get an overview of identity and access management solutions at SAP. And with this, we get a good overview on the authentication, single sign-on, as well as the identity lifecycle management with respect to the details on identity services, specifically on identity authentication and the identity provisioning, which is part of the identity services. So to take us through the session and to have more insights on these topics, we have two of my colleagues who have joined. We have Marco Soma. He's a product manager for security and identity access management at SAP. And he is also responsible for the SAP Cloud Identity Services. And with Marco, we have Harini, who is also a product manager in line of security, the Cloud Identity Services. And her focus is predominantly on the identity provisioning service. Before we actually get into the session through Marco and Harini, I'll just hand over to Mukesh one more time. And from there on, we will move to Marco and Harini to take us through the session. Over to you, Mukesh.
Just wanted to quickly check if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, super. So thanks, Karthik. Thanks everyone for joining the session. One of the things that we are trying to do at INDUS is to enable the sense of networking and the ability for people to get to know new people, to make new connections. And as part of that, what we are trying to do across all user group events is to create the opportunity for you to make new connections, meet new people, and not just meet them during these events, but also take those connections offline and into other areas of your life. So that that's probably the strength of the community as well, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all of you in 2 breakout rooms. I think there'll be 5 people or 4 people in each one of your rooms. And you have about a couple of minutes to quickly introduce yourself, which company you're from, what security means to you, or whatever, So just some rules is that, don't take too long. So maybe keep your introduction crisp to 30 seconds or less. And note down the names of people whom you connect with. And if possible, once we are done, either during using the chat here, exchange numbers, email ID, do one-on-one chat rather than put everything on the main chat. And also kind of, find these people on LinkedIn and connect with them so that, you start building your network from that perspective. So start the breakout room and you'll have about 3 or 4 people in each room. So introduce yourself. You'll have about 2 minutes for you to finish the introduction, and then you can come back and join the main room. I hope that's okay. Hi, Shwetank. Did I get your name right?
Yes.
Nice. I hope you had a chance to introduce yourself.
I didn't get because I joined a bit late into the room.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Welcome back, Harini. Hi, Samir. Hi, Vivin. Harini, you're still on mute, I guess, so we can't hear you.
So yeah, we finished. We just finished a quick introduction round and
Nice.
got back.
So did you? Yeah. Okay. Good. So another 10 seconds before everyone else joins in. I think one room is come in. The second room, I think, is still doing the introduction.
Yeah.
So they
I
should be back.
think we missed out one participant, Shwetank. I see Shwetank has joined back.
Yeah,
I think
he
we
got
lost his connection. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I hope you all had a opportunity to introduce yourself and kind of get to know someone. As I said, please try and see if you can take these connections offline and start building some connections going forward. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Marco to take us through the content and Harini. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, then let's give it a start. Thanks for the intro. As mentioned, I'm product manager for the identity services with focus on single sign-on and identity authentication service. And Harini and I, we will introduce the services with the following agenda. We wanted to put it into a bigger picture, what's going on at SAP, how the integration topics are addressed, because there are major work streams, especially from architecture perspective, setup, and influencing our portfolio and the activities. Then, of course, we have a look at the identity authentication service first with a brief demo. Thereafter, Harini will introduce the topic of identity lifecycle management with identity provisioning, finally, where you find further information. Okay, so what is SAP from architecture perspective? What is going on? What has changed compared to, let's say, 2 years ago? So in principle, SAP has put the integration questions on top of the agenda. So these are really major activities that are going on. Our board members, Jürgen Müller and Thomas Sauer-Essig, they introduced this integration strategy paper here, what SAP is committed to do. And for us, that means we are providing integration services there. From our perspective, the topic that we are in charge of is taking care of a consistent security and identity management. In today's session, with a focus on the identity access management capabilities for SAP cloud solutions. So that's our focus, what we are dealing with. And what does it mean? What we are offering. So when we talk about authentication and single sign-on for our customers, so in principle, what's the situation? So a customer receives a new SAP cloud solution. And the challenge is that all of our customers have, or at least the majority, a single sign-on infrastructure in place. So we are delivering a public cloud solution to the customer who has an existing environment in place that might be still on premise, partially in the cloud, or even fully in the cloud, where usually a corporate identity provider is established. The corporate user store, the system of origin for the employee users is usually an HR system, here in that overview, provided in on-premise environment, but that might also be success factors in the cloud. And with regards to single sign-on, SAP deliberately decided to introduce and to put more efforts in establishing central service, the identity authentication service, to integrate all SAP cloud solutions in a common way with a corporate identity provider, and to make it seamlessly integrated with a corporate IDP but with also the option to have authentication means at hand in the identity authentication service. So we're not simply relying on supporting open standard protocols like SAML or OpenID Connect in all the applications, but we decided to centrally integrate the identity authentication service and make sure that our customers have all the capabilities, the integration capabilities, as well as the necessary capabilities at hand to authenticate all their users when they're accessing the different type of cloud solutions. Now, when we look a little bit deeper into the capabilities of the identity authentication service, we immediately see that SAP is committed to support open standards in the cloud. So this is, and that has proven to be very beneficial, so that SAP solutions can seamlessly be integrated with third party, but it also helps us internally. So we can harmonize the integration protocols, the integration, and that also eases our efforts, but it's of course also beneficial for our customers. So when we look at the integration capabilities to cloud applications, we do support two single sign-on protocols. On the one side, the security assertion markup language or the OpenID Connect standard. When we look at the integration capabilities for identity federation with a corporate identity provider, we so far support that based on the SAML standard. We are working on making that also possible based on the OpenID Connect standard. Beyond that, the pure federation scenarios with an existing corporate identity provider, identity authentication offers various ways in case it acts as authenticating authority. So when users are registered in identity authentication itself, they can provide the following type of credentials, either username and password. Our bigger customers have a PKI infrastructure in place to have passwordless authentication based on X509 certificates. A lot of customers have a Kerberos infrastructure in place, which we leverage via the SP-Nego protocol to have seamless single sign-on. Very important is that identity authentication offers various ways for multi-factor authentication. And because this is becoming more and more important to have stronger means of authentication at hand when the access to cloud solution has to be protected. The options that we are supporting are on the one side, so-called time-based one-time password tokens. These are some 6-digit codes that are generated via an application that, for instance, runs on the user's mobile device. We recently added support for web authentication, which is the standard, the underlying standard is the FIDO standard. And the demo that I will show later is based on web authentication. We also support RSA in case a customer has an RSA server in place, or via a third-party solution to be able to send a second factor, usually a code, via SMS. So these are the, well, I would call it fundamental capabilities and integration scenarios that the identity authentication service offers. There's two very important functionalities which I wanted to introduce a little bit more in depth. This is on the one side what we call the conditional authentication. In principle, I would call it that way, that identity authentication can act as an authentication broker. It can send the users to different types of authenticating authority. So when we have certain applications, imagine we have a public-facing portal, a customer-facing portal, which will be accessed not only by external users, but by partner users, but of course also employees have to access this single portal. And when we want to serve such a scenario with SP-initiated single sign-on, means that there is one unique login link for all users on the application and a different one. Here you have a login for employees, for partners and externals. Then the identity provider needs to decide does the user have to provide his credentials? Should I do that locally and ask him for username, password, or send to the corporate identity provider, because employees usually already have an active session? Or is this a partner user from a trusted partner company, and he should also benefit from single sign-on? So that's the conditional authentication mechanism based on various criteria. We have a rule-based configuration, which users to send to which authenticating authority and validate the user's credentials. That from user experience perspective, ideally, we always achieve single sign-on for the different types of users. Just having a look at the chat. It was just the introduction for the questions. I put the chat window aside in case you do have questions. I try to keep an eye on that. The second very important aspect and really fundamental functionality that identity authentication offers is how to enforce multi-factor authentication, because this is not a one-size-fits-all activity that all users, when they are accessing a certain application, have to provide a second factor, but it turned out that our customers have various needs to enforce that. So there might be a need. Typical example that I like to give is when users access an HR solution like SuccessFactors, then it might be a valid use case that a manager who has much more authorizations in the system has to provide a second factor, whereas a usual employee there, one would be fine with a first factor only. So this is something that can be configured with a concept of so-called risk-based authentication, that some users have to provide very strong credentials. Other users are fine with usual authentication, whereas a third group of users might be completely blocked from access to a certain application. So that's a quite powerful capability that the identity authentication service offers, and very commonly used capability. Last but not least, what is very important for our service is that we have a seamless integration into customer scenarios. Although we are dealing with mainly focused on B2E scenarios, it is appreciated to have branding capabilities. And we are offering that in principle in two ways. On the one side, very simple branding capabilities to be able to replace such a logo here for a company, to adjust the color style, things like that. Of course, for registration, the terms of use and privacy statements can be configured. But it's also possible to completely change the look and feel via full customization capability by uploading a custom style sheet, so that these are all the options. In addition, customers have an easy way how to override, for instance, the labels here. In case a customer does not allow email as logon alias, but just user ID, go to the adjustment of the UI texts and change this label here to what is established at a customer side. From product perspective, the UIs are responsive, so that it means they are also properly rendered when displayed on mobile devices. And we are supporting, I think, roughly 30 different end user languages. The administration UI is purely offered in English, whereas from end user perspective, as I said, more than 30 languages are supported in the identity authentication service. So that was a really very brief run through of the service. And since our time is limited, and I definitely wanted to show you the system in action, that's why I'm going to stop here with the presentation and we have a look at the demo. As I mentioned, one thing that we recently extended was the capability to use web authentication as a means to enforce stronger means of authentication. And this is now something that we have a look at. The picture here, this is something, okay, I will hold it in the camera when I do the demo. That's a so-called YubiKey. That's a hardware token which can be used to generate a secret for a second factor. Let's have a look at the demo. So first of all, we have a look at the administration console. I hope you can see the screen. Let's first have a look at the application configuration for the demo application that we have. So the strength of authentication is enforced in the concept of risk-based authentication. And as I just showed in the slide, you have different parameters for which you can define rules. So let's have a look at that rule configuration. If I would add a new rule, I can decide what the rule enforces, whether it allows access with a first factor only, whether two-factor authentication is enforced, or whether those users for which the rule applies are blocked from access to the application. And then we have a configuration capability for IP range, for an authentication method. For instance, users authenticated with a social identity provider have to provide a second factor. Things like that might be common use cases, or that employees have to provide different authentication mechanisms than customer or partner users. And as mentioned, the example with the cloud groups, it is possible to define rules, for instance, that apply for employees only. But I'm not going to do that. It's just for visualization. What we have established here is a rule that all users of type employee have the choice for two-factor authentication with either TOTP or web authentication. That's what is configured. Okay, let's have a look what that looks like in a demo application. So this is the demo application for which we've just seen the configuration. And now let's give it a go. I provide my credentials for this user. And you see now, I'm obviously an employee because I'm offered either TOTP or web two-factor authentication, and I make the choice for the web 2FA based on the FIDO standard. I have to use my device, and what I did this here is, I hope you can see it in the camera, that's the YubiKey, which I'm going to use now. I have to enter the YubiKey into a USB port. Then I'm asked for a PIN, enter the PIN. And finally, I have to prove that I'm not a bot, but I have to touch it. And you see, thereafter, I'm in and successfully logged in to the application. Do make a logout and give it a retry with a different user. I have a second demo user. Let's see what happens if I use Nick. And for Nick, I have registered fingerprint login via my laptop. And you see, I just put the finger on the fingerprint reader of my laptop, and that was accepted. It depends what you're registering in your user profile and what the administrator allows as a second factor. So basically, that was a brief demo for stronger means of authentication. You had a glimpse of the administration side of the house via the admin console, what that looks like. So that's how an administrator can manage the authentication behavior. Here, of course, also all the other capabilities like local user management, federation with a corporate IDP. This is all managed via this so-called administration console for the identity authentication service. And we've seen the counterpart, how the behavior changes or applies then in a demo application that delegates authentication to the identity authentication service. Yeah, that was what I wanted to share in a very brief and concise overview. And with that, I stop sharing and I hand over to Harini to continue with identity provisioning and identity lifecycle management.
All right, yeah. So can you all see me and hear me, probably?
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you, Harini.
All right, so let me share my desktop and continue. And I hope the screen is visible now, the slides.
Not yet.
I think I need to swap the displays. Now, is it visible?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
I see that I'm sharing, but I guess there's some delay. Is the screen visible now?
No, I don't see it coming up.
Let me stop the sharing and probably try again then.
Yeah.
So share screen.
No, something's happening. Yeah, that did the trick.
All right. Okay, can you see the slides now?
Yeah, confirmed.
Okay, so yeah, thanks Marco for that very nice demo on identity authentication and also the background basics about how the service works. So what I'm going to talk about in this session is about identity provisioning. So identity authentication and identity provisioning are two closely aligned services under the umbrella of sub-cloud identity services. And here, what provisioning is usually taking care is that it makes sure that from your user store, it can provision the users to the various business applications. Like let's say you are using at the customer side a user store such as an Active Directory application, and you want to now use that as your central user source and provision to several target systems, then identity provisioning takes care of that. And typically you see in a company a scenario such as when a new employee is onboarded, the employee first joins the company, then they probably need some access to different business applications. Then they are switching positions or getting promoted and so on, or maybe also offboarding if the employee leaves the company. Then there are, depending on the employee's current status, there are various changes that needs to be done to the roles of that particular employee. So identity provisioning helps in all of these changes, making sure that the right authorizations are then given to that particular user. So in this slide, the next slide, we see how this IPS works. So IPS, in short, I call it identity provisioning as IPS. So IPS has these two concepts called source systems and target system connectors. So from the source, like in this example, where I explained that Active Directory could be a source, or even identity authentication could be a source system. This example, you first in your IPS service, you first connect this IAS as a source, and then provision to any target application. It could be your S/4HANA cloud or marketing cloud or various business applications. And if you want the exhaustive list of all the applications supported by IPS, it's in one of the links in our documentation in the next slides. Okay. All right, and talking about the general capabilities of IPS. So how is IPS working? It's important to understand this standard called SCIM. So IPS is based on the SCIM standard. SCIM is nothing but a standard which defines what are the attributes and what are the format of each user and group. So any other application, let's say any other identity management solution, which is also supporting the SCIM standard, can potentially also connect with IPS through a special functionality called proxy. And in fact, that is the one which we also see on the screen here in the third tile. So proxy system is basically to support such a functionality. And then in general, so what are the things that IPS could do? So IPS could do, let's say there's a user coming from Active Directory, but there are certain special attributes of that particular user coming from identity authentication. Then IPS could merge such identities from different sources. Depending on some policy-based configurations, it could assign specific assignments to that user. and it could also do some mapping. So converting basically the format. So in a certain source system, something might be called as a last name, for example, whereas in a target system, it could be called as family name, and IPS can do such mapping between the different formats. And also important is usually in your user store, you might have like 100,000 employees, but for a certain target business application, you don't need all the 100,000 employees. You probably need only like 5,000 of those employees. Then you could set up the filtering configurations and so on accordingly, so that only those set of 5,000 employees are then provisioned. So that's a good summary of all the capabilities that IPS offers. And in addition, so there are this our SAP's on-premise identity management solution. So in the past, most of our on-premise applications worked with identity management, which was then acting as the leading application to manage identity lifecycle for on-premise applications. And identity provisioning is our cloud application, and we have support for hybrid integration so that the customers can continue using, for example, IDM as the leading application and connect to target applications in the cloud.
It seems your screen is frozen. I think you wanted to swip to the next slide, but we still see the capability slide.
Okay, no, Marco, it's still in that slide. Let me switch. Yeah.
Okay, now thank you.
Yeah, this is actually, you're right, because I wanted to switch to the next slide. This is the one which is explaining our hybrid model, hybrid scenario. So we see IPS, which is the cloud solution, and identity management, the corresponding on-premise solution. And IDM, for example, offers many connectors predominantly to all on-premise applications, whereas IPS connectors are more focused in the cloud. For example, IPS offers connectivity to BTP, to SuccessFactors, S4HANA, and so on. So mostly it is the focus, but of course there are also IPS connectors for S4HANA on-premise because it's one of our flagship products, exceptional products. But in general, the focus for IPS is to support the cloud applications. Okay. And then moving to this next slide, which acts very similar. So from a technical point of view, this functionality works similar, but there's also this possibility where you could connect IPS to any other third-party IAM solution, where provided this third-party IAM solution is then also following the SCIM standard, right? Okay, so that's a pretty a short overview of the service itself to explain what IPS concretely is doing. And maybe I will show all of this in a demo. So in the demo, what we're going to see is we have a user store. So the user store in this case is going to be identity authentication. So about the service which Marco earlier in the session explained. And then we have a target application where I have a demo tenant of SAP Analytics Cloud, which is one of our analytics products. And I will use this as a target system and use IPS to provision the entities from identity authentication to Analytics Cloud. So let me switch to the demo. So can you see my browser now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here I have configured, so you see in the browsers, basically this is a test IPS tenant that I'm using, an identity provisioning tenant. And we have these source systems, target systems that I explained earlier in the slides. So here, when I click on the source system, we can see that I have configured one system identity authentication as a source. This particular system has some properties. So if we can go in there, I see that this is basically the URL of the identity authentication service. And in the transformations, so I mentioned that we could filter and provision only selected set of users. For the demo purposes, I don't want to provision all the users from my test systems, but I'm just going to pick one user, which is of the ID P3. This is basically a demo user that I created in the identity authentication system. So let me switch back there. Yeah. So the URL that we saw in our properties, now this is basically the same URL where under identity authentication, I have this P3 user for this demo purpose. And I want to basically provision this demo user into the analytics cloud system. So I come back to my IPS UI now and go into the target system. So here I have one target system as well configured. And this is the of type analytics cloud. So you see that this particular, I just named it as INDUS Demo. And this is of type analytics cloud. So let's go into the properties of this system. And here we have the URL of the analytics cloud system. So I'm going to now show you another tab. This is basically the analytics cloud system, which I've configured in my IPS UI. So, and I am under the under the security part of users in this particular system. And I have filtered for demo just to show that currently there is no demo user. And I'm going to come back to IPS. I'm going to trigger this job so that this user from IAS is then provisioned to Analytics Cloud. So in order to trigger the jobs, I need to go again into the source system. And then I click on my jobs tab and let me run this job. So we see that a job is triggered. Maybe one more thing that we could notice here is go into the target system. So in my target system, I always need to configure which is my source, because I could have multiple source systems configured, but I really want only one source system from which my users should be provisioned, for example, to this particular target system. Then I need to pick my source. So let's quickly go into our analytics cloud system to see if we have this user provision. Yeah. So here we see that the demo user got provisioned. Let's go. Sometimes if you want to know further details, because typically in a real scenario, you're going to be doing this for thousands of records. Some might succeed, some might fail. So we can go into job logs. Yeah. So in the home page, you have this job logs tab. In fact, we have encountered some errors. So let me look into the details. Yeah. So here we have that we can see that one record was created. That's the demo record basically that I showed. It also shows that 2 records were updated. And yeah, and perhaps there are some errors as well, because I do see an error message, but this is usually useful for debugging and yeah, such issues, such finding out what is causing the errors and so on. So that's shortly a demo. Of course, there are some further details if you can look into the details of each of the system, because usually when you configure every system, every source and target, you need to provide some sort of credentials with that system. So if we get into the details for each system, depending on the application, there are various types of credentials that are required, and accordingly, we could go into the details of the system. So in our product documentation pages, these are explained in detail. So now let me switch back to the slides due to time reasons. Yes, so to summarize, that was a short overview of IPS and a demo. And here we have some further links to our security community. So you see, this is a security community topic. So in case you're kicking off your implementation projects with security and have further questions, you can reach out or post questions in the community. And also you have our contacts here. Good, thank you. So let me give it back to the organizers here.
Thanks, Harini. Thanks so much to you and Marco for that quick introduction on the two services which we have under identity services. So any questions from the participants? If you have any specific queries where you need clarifications, if you have not put on the chat window, you are good to open up and then ask the question also, if you have.
Hi Mukesh,
Yes,
Samir here. Yeah, I want to know whether this IAM is a separate module in SAP. Am I correct?
This is yeah, Karthik here. So so when you say module, these are services on cloud.
This is only for cloud solutions, or
Yeah.
not for on-premise.
On premise, we have separate. I think it's better Marco and Harini handle this question.
Yes, this is Marcus. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Marco.
Switch the video back on. Yes, so identity authentication and identity provisioning are so-called public cloud services. So they are offered in as subscription-based services in various regions in the world. And customer will either usually get it via bundled delivery with any other product. So we have many SAP cloud products deliver the services, and the delivery model is as follows. Since we intend to enable single sign-on for all SAP cloud solutions. So the very first product that is delivered, and when it is detected that the customer does not have identity authentication yet, then a new tenant will be generated as part of the delivery of the first cloud product, and subsequent products should integrate then with the already existing IAS tenant, so that single sign-on is guaranteed. And that's the default model. We are delivering to customers one productive, one non-productive IAS tenant for the test integration scenarios. They are separate services. So from UI perspective, you access them separately. But a lot of SAP cloud solutions like S4, like SuccessFactors, like IBP, BTP, they are integrated with the identity authentication service, but the integration is handled via trust configuration, and the service itself is separately configured there.
Marco, suppose we do have an on-premise edition of S4HANA. And we do have SuccessFactors cloud version. SuccessFactors is anyway cloud version, and SAC is also there.
Yeah.
But the S4HANA version is on premise.
Yeah.
So how we can integrate using IAM all these products?
The hybrid scenarios, usually we are dealing, it depends also from technical perspective how the S4 system is accessed. From a technical perspective, if you're still using Windows domain proprietary client like SAP GUI, then there's no other way than doing that with SAP single sign-on and SAP GUI, because SAP GUI does not support browser protocols like SAML. So this is not an option. It is technically possible also to establish single sign-on with on-premise products for browser-based scenarios. But from a licensing perspective, the identity authentication service is for free for any SAP cloud solution that we are offering. But for on-premise and third-party applications, it requires a license. So it's in principle a default integration component for SAP cloud products, but as I said, not for third-party or on-premise. So that requires a separate license.
Thank you, Marco.
Any further questions to Marco and Harini?
I think there was a question by Sudhir on the chat. If someone can answer, I think Harini has answered that, but maybe if you can just
yeah, maybe I can read out the question.
Yeah,
so can
so
we
that
use,
for someone who watches the recording later, you can read out the question and answer.
Sure. So the question here is, can we use cloud identity services solutions for on-premise multiple SAP solutions not interlinked with AD? So Active Directory was just an example that I mentioned in the demo. So for example, in the demo, we really saw just identity authentication service as the source system. And the target was Analytics Cloud, which is a cloud system. There are some on-premise products, for example, S4HANA on-premise, which we are supporting with IPS with a connector. But as I already mentioned, the on-premise connectors, we have just one or two connectors, like Active Directory is an on-premise connector and S4HANA on-premise. But the rest of the connectors are more focused with cloud products for IPS. And if you are specifically looking only for the on-premise systems, then you can look into the SAP Identity Management solution, which is the corresponding on-premise product. I can also post the name of the product in the chat. So Sudhir, I hope that answered your question.
Abhay, do you have a question? Looks like
Yes.
you wanted to ask. Yes, Abhay, go on.
No, so my question is more related to integration and integration tools which you have.
So what is your question, Abhay?
So like we have more of a SaaS-based solution and which needs to be integrated with SAP. S4HANA we are using right now. So is there any way like, we can simplify and reduce the time to market to these products?
So Abhay, actually, this is probably a question that we just answered earlier today in a
Okay,
different session we ran. I'll share the link of that session here on the chat so that you can watch the recording already, which is available on YouTube.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
Harini, Karthik here. I just have one question. Say we have this on-premise IDM, which could be integrated with the provisioning service. Is it possible to do the same way for any non-SAP based on-premise IDM solution to integrate with the provisioning service, in turn manage all the cloud-based solutions from SAP?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is possible with some other third-party identity access management solutions as well, using the same functionality. Exactly like I showed, the proxy functionality is the one which covers for both IDM and any other third-party systems. But it's important to keep in mind that this third-party system, whichever system that you're focusing, should support SCIM standard, because the proxy connectivity is based on the SCIM standards.
Okay.
So is there a particular system that you're looking for?
No, specifically. No, basically there are customers who are using on-premise different IDM solutions. They might not have an IDM solution. And in turn, they might be interested in SAP's cloud-based services. Okay. So in that case, it's a case where we need to make sure that we are able to address both, and it should not be a prerequisite like they need to go for our IDM solution to make sure they are able to manage both their on-premise as well as the cloud-based solution. So that's a reason I was asking this question, because there are customers who are like this, who have on-premise different IDM solution, and in turn they might go for SAPs, like for example, SuccessFactors, SAC, and all those new services from SAP, cloud-based services. That's the reason I asked. Mm-hmm. So,
so if the on-premise solution supports SCIM standard, then sure, it's possible. And also for Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, and G Suite, we offer dedicated connectors. For the others, you have to integrate with the proxy functionality.
Okay, thank you. So, Marco, one question to you. So, one point which for clarification for others as well, right? So there is no need for us to create the user accounts for the single sign-on to work on cloud, right? So which means that at no point it is a requirement that we need to create the user accounts if they are already existing on premise.
Let's put it that way.
In case of an integration, yep. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
When we have a scenario where we also have SAP SSO that is on premise, and also we have for cloud-based solutions, we need a single sign-on requirement. Yeah. Then is there a mandatory requirement that the user accounts which are already there on premise should also be moved to cloud to make this work end-to-end?
The answer as of today is it is not required. So the identity authentication service can act as a pure proxy, thus delegate the authentication request to the corporate IDP and simply forward the authentication request without persisting a user record. Going forward from a strategic perspective, we must expect that this becomes a requirement. For, in principle, there are two reasons, or even three. First of all, some scenarios for SuccessFactors and people analytics, where you have embedded analytics, there's often the need to exchange user data between these two applications. That's why SuccessFactors has established a provisioning from SuccessFactors to SAC via IAS. So that's then a precondition. The other thing is, in the future, SAP will refactor the cloud solutions slightly and also leverage central foundation service like One Workflow Inbox, Audit Log, and things like that. And there we have a need to harmonize the identifiers. IAS issues so-called user UUID, which we're trying to establish across the SAP cloud solution. So when that becomes a requirement that a certain solution already relies on a central service, which requires the user UUID, then this will become a requirement to persist the users in IAS. And last but not least, we have to look beyond the security question. Is today we are fine with browser-based single sign-on, but we will see much more scenarios where you have subsequent app-to-service communication, app-to-app communication, service-to-service communication, which require security tokens with principal propagation to protect this communication. And here we need to have tokens that will be issued by the identity authentication service, and then there will also be a need to have the user profile in IAS. So in the future, you may expect that more and more applications insist on having the users. They must not be active, but at least as, let's call it, a shadow user, inactive user in identity authentication. I hope this complex answer answered your simple question.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, Mark.
Okay.
So any further questions from others online? Okay. So if there are no further questions, we don't have updates on the security notes for this month. So we are good from that side. So if we don't have any further questions, I think we are good for the session today. And I also take this opportunity to thank both Marco as well as Harini for taking time to give us their insights on these two services which are there from SAP's cloud identity services. And we hope that this session had actually given you some inputs on what is that and the way you could look into when it comes to identity and access management, especially from a hybrid scenario, and more towards how you could look into from a solution perspective as well. So Mukesh, if we are good, I think we are good to close the session as well.
Yeah, I think all good from my end. So thank you everyone for joining in.
Thank you.
I really do hope that everyone is safe, your family is safe, your friends are safe and healthy. So stay safe, stay home, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.